Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. And Antoine, thank you very much for that contribution there. I think what we've got are two really different approaches here, and that you've really thought about what could be improved. And I agreed with almost everything you said there in terms of potential for Talis Elevate. Mine is more likely to be a bit more gushy because I've had a wonderful experience. But that's not to say that I don't think that all of your points are really important to discuss here. So yes, as Matthew says, I work in languages and linguistics. I'm actually an applied linguist and an associate professor at York St John. And I've been using Talis Elevate since 2020 because it was a lockdown-driven situation that drove me to need to do something different with my teaching at the time, as we all did. But I now use Talis Elevate across 3 modules, and actually I've chosen to present all 3 because I do a slightly different thing on all 3. And I think that shows you something about how you can most best utilise what Talis Elevate offers. So on my master's module, Research Methods in Linguistics, I actually just use Talis Elevate as the reading list, as a key reading list. So for each week there's a set reading and I just pop it on Talis Elevate and nothing happens. People read it, it's fine. People are spending some time in it. That's lovely. But as you can see from my screen here, hopefully, nothing is happening social annotation wise. And that means, I think, is that we need to be explicit about the use of social annotation, otherwise it won't happen. And so that takes me on to my next way that I have used this resource. And that's on a second-year undergraduate programme in a module called Linguistic Diversity in the Classroom. And I've actually used it for one classroom activity. This is actually a big lecture activity. It's not a seminar-based thing, but I've got sort of 70-odd students in the classroom, I think. And my thinking was around saving paper. So most of our students now come with laptops to their lectures, not always, but of course it is possible to read Elevate on a phone as well. It's not easy to do annotations though. And so that is something that is worth investigating, the extent to which we can improve what the phone interface could look like. But largely I've used this as a resource in one particular session for second years. When I have this enormously wonderful resource, a few years ago, some people for government did some case studies on provision in schools for English as an additional language, and the case studies were entirely ignored by government because, of course, there was a small matter of a general election. And so all of this work got completely ignored, except I use it in my teaching. And so we have 10 case studies. And so what I do is I go around the lecture theatre numbering people 1 to 10, and we all dive into the same document. And I ask the students to comment on particular case studies, so that there's a group of people around the room looking at the same case study, but they're not sitting with each other, and to comment as they go. And as you can see in this session, there were 149 comments made in this document during the time, and we can see that the students are kind of in the moment in the class working as a group, but away from each other. And I think the key thing for me here is that if they were working together and talking about it, they would be doing something different linguistically than they are when they are having to craft a written comment. So it takes them just that little bit further, I think, in terms of packaging their ideas or their thoughts on a particular thing than they would get in a discussion that they might well easily go off task quite quickly. So this was 3 different students. I've redacted the names for obvious reasons. But you can see that people are piling in and working with each other, not necessarily replying to each other, but sort of supporting each other's comments as they go. And so that was working really, really nicely as that class activity. Sadly, that module is now no longer, but I say sadly, it's to make my workload better, so I'm not going to complain. But the one that I really want to focus on is the work that I've done with my third year undergraduate students on a module called Attitudes to Language, which is almost diametrically opposite, Antoine, from your more quant kind of work. This is a very socio-linguistically focused module, applied linguistics, with a very, very strong social justice bent to it. I've always actually embedded the key reading for this module into class time. And that's because I wanted them to come to the class with a very blank slate, essentially, having not really thought about this particular aspect of attitudes to language, frankly, so that they could bring all their prejudice with them and we could explore what was going on in the class space. So what I used to do pre-COVID was split all of the groups into what are called postings groups, and they all do an assessment, which is online posting on Moodle. And I asked the group to read one of 5 papers individually in a class space, which is quite interesting, having that kind of reading retreat in the middle of the teaching. Some students found it very, very stressful, sitting quietly reading this paper. Others were fine. And then we got back into their groups, their postings groups, to share what they'd found out, because they'd all been reading something different. COVID meant that I had to look for different ways to manage that. And I found TALIS Elevate. And what this now means is that the group students get into 2 groups at the beginning of the module. One is their postings group, the small group of 5, that they stay together and share online postings with and build a small community as a part of their assessments. But they're now also in a reading group, because each of those posting groups, say A through to H, then have 5 people in them that are in either reading group 1 up through to 5. And that means that they end up in a reading group of 10. And each week they follow the correct link, hopefully, to the reading that's in TALIS for them. And you can see that each resource I've labelled group 5, group 4, group 3 there. You can see that that's all labelled up. And so when the student clicks on the correct link, they go through to their reading, and they're there with the other 10 people. We do it in class in an hour-long seminar. So we sit together and do a reading retreat. The best thing, though, is, of course, if people can't attend, they join us online, and I mark them present. Whether I'm supposed to or not, I don't know, but I do mark them present, because they are. If they're in the space and I see them commenting, I have absolutely no concerns about their engagement. And we could see some examples of the kind of communications that they have here. A paper in which there were 10 people commenting, but 74 comments made during that less than an hour. It's about 40 minutes really they get to do the actual reading, where they're piling in on each other, building on each other's thinking. And of course, what that means is that the next class is the one where they get back into their postings groups. But they've done that having already really thought about the reading that they've just done, not just skim reading it. They've read it, but they've also had the opportunity to check they understood. And I do really set it up at the beginning of the module to say, look, this is also a chance to pile in and say, I have no idea what this word means. Does anyone else have a clue? And we do get, a lot of honesty about elements of that as well. So the things I've learned then from using TALIS is that the actual social annotation side of things needs to be encouraged. They need to know that that's an expectation. I haven't gone as far as grading them at all on those annotations, and I'm not sure I want to. But they definitely need to know that it's there for an explicit reason to scaffold their learning, and that really helps. I've been playing around with whether I should explicitly ask them to do certain things in readings. Sometimes on certain pieces that seems to work quite well, but oftentimes it seems better to just let them explore the resources. I'm really thinking that in-class use has been most effective for me, partly because you can be so explicit, but also you've got your captive audience really. But I've seen that it's a very effective scaffolding tool indeed. And the discussions in the postings groups are in another league from where they were before these students were having this chance to talk about their reading as they went. Me joining in seems to be a good thing. So I sit in the same session as them, reading with a coffee, and join in on the comments. And I think that motivates them to be aware that I could be in their paper, but they don't know where I am because I could be in one of 5. But also I can address any misunderstandings or issues that are coming up. And the students from the last 3 years have reported back that they absolutely love this resource, and they do feel supported and comforted by its use. So after that gushing, I'll stop there and look forward to seeing where our discussions take us.